So this is supposed to be a football show, so we should maybe talk about some football a little bit. Now, both of you guys have been away on summer tours this year. We've got a lot of excitement about the Premier League starts on Friday, Manchester United against Fulham. So I think the starting point, obviously, United play first. So let's talk about Man United's summer so far. As usual, they've been busy, making headlines for the right or wrong reasons. So how have you assessed it so far?
Yeah, busy. Obviously, the fans will be happy that they've made some transfers. I think the jury is still out on those deals. Obviously, there's a certain amount of excitement when new players come through the door. Obviously, loads of new executives, best in class and all that, and have seemed to have stuck with the same transfer policy of signing players who Ten Hag has worked with in the past. Look, obviously, all of these players are good players, otherwise we wouldn't be signing for Man United. Whether they can show the potential that has led United down the road to signing them is another matter entirely, because we've seen time and time again that United sign players and it just doesn't work out.
So I'm going to have a bit of a crack at United here, but first of all, I think they have had a good summer in the sense that they got some good business done early on with Lenny Yoro and Joshua Zirkzee. Obviously, Yoro's injured now for a prolonged period of time, which is really unfortunate because, you know, new club, you want to get off to a good start. They've got players out. I think they're going to get more players out, but I know there's some excitement about the signing of Matthijs de Ligt and Noussair Mazraoui from Bayern Munich. I think Mazraoui is a good sign. I think he's an upgrade on Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Yeah. Absolutely upgrade, I think, no doubt about that. Matthijs de Ligt, now, obviously he's a really good player. I'm not questioning that. I think the situation with de Ligt is he captained Ajax at 19. That he's obviously got something about him. But I remember I spoke to a contact of mine a few years ago. He worked at one of the big six clubs, and United was signing Bastian Schweinsteiger, and he said United are doing it again. So what do you mean? He says, you never, ever sign a player from a big club like a Bayern Munich, a Barcelona, a Real Madrid, because these clubs, right, they can pay the players whatever they want, so they never have to sell a player in terms of matching what the Premier League play. Also, they play for trophies. So his point was, why are they letting these players go? Man United, Bastian Schweinsteiger, Rafael Varane, Casemiro, Cristiano Ronaldo from Juventus. Not one of them was a success. Now, why Bayern Munich letting Matthijs de Ligt go? They don't need the money. He's only mid-20s. It's not like he's had lots of injuries. But he played more than people think last season. But ultimately, Eric Dyer was playing more for Bayern Munich than Matthijs de Ligt was. So, Man City don't make this kind of signing. Arsenal don't make this kind of signing. Liverpool don't make this kind of signing in terms of buying players that have had a good run elsewhere. So, I might be wrong. De Ligt might be a bit younger than the rest. But I still think signing players from big clubs, you're just going to get yourself stung.
It's funny because I'm going to preface this by saying that I think de Ligt is a good player. Like you said, there's obviously something about him. The summer of 2018, I was away with United on tour in the US, and Jose was desperate for a centre-half.
Yeah.
We did a pre-season game away at Bayern. There was only a couple of reporters there, and Jose taken a couple of us up to one side and said that he was desperate to sign Jerome Boateng from Bayern. Aging centre-half, obviously still a good player, but coming towards the end of his career. United refused to do it. And on deadline day that summer, there was a press conference at United, and we were sat in the little press room to the side at Carrington, and Ed Woodward walked in. And basically, Ed walked in to tell us why United weren't going to sign a centre-half or the centre-half that Jose wanted. And the reason he said was that United had learned their lesson about signing players from Bayern Munich. He said they got stung with Schweinsteiger, they'd got stung with Owen Hargreaves, players who arrived at United with big reputations, on big wages, and just didn't work out either because of their injury record or for whatever reason. And he said, he left the room and said, we're never going to sign players from Bayern again. And then 6 years later, they've signed two lads from Bayern. Now, again, it's still very early to write players off, and they're obviously two very, very good players. Mazraoui played particularly well for Morocco at the World Cup. He's sensible signing, he can play both sides. United need someone who can play on the right and the left. They also need a centre-half who can replace Varane, particularly when you try to ease Yoro in. But as Mark says, these big clubs do not tend to sell players who they don't want to let go.
Yeah, there's a suspicion about the price as well. It feels cheap for someone like De Ligt in particular, who had the world at his feet 5 years ago, and was going for a far bigger sum. I mean, I have to say, I think he's a good signing for United because I think he's an upgrade on what they've got. I'm not sure about the comparisons with Schweinsteiger and Ronaldo and Varane. I mean, they were Varane, how old was Varane when he
started?
28, 29. Yeah. Obviously, Ronaldo.
So why Bayern signing a player in his peak years? Is it 24?
Yeah, but because he's lost his way. I mean, I think United will probably look at somebody like Martin Odegaard as the hopeful comparison there. That this kind of teenage prodigy, had the world at his feet, lost his way a little bit. got, when Arsenal signed Odegaard, that was initially on loan. People thought, okay, here's another loan. He's going to hang around for 6 months. They got him for 35 million, I think it was, a similar kind of fee, and he's obviously become one of the best players in the Premier League. I still think at 24, there's definitely questions to answer, but that's built into the price. That's why they've been able to get him. But at 24, he's got time to learn his trade. His peak years are ahead of him. He can play out from the back, which is a big part of Erik Ten Hag's preferred philosophy. How many times do United get caught in possession in their own half of the pitch and concede goals? He will help that. He knows the flip side is he knows the manager. He doesn't have to spend any time trying to understand what he wants from his centre backs. I've got concerns about the centre back pairing. Presumably, it's going to be him and Martinez in terms of pace. They're not the quickest. If they want to play with a high line, they're going to have problems there. But I can see how it could work, put it that way.
I mean, I think you could look at it two ways. Why have to do Mazraoui and De Ligt together? Could you not just get Mazraoui to cover the... But anyway, the situation is United have signed Matthijs De Ligt. But before we move on to Arsenal, James, with you, Luke Shaw is injured again. Now, he upset a lot of Man United fans by not playing since February, going to the Euros, barely playing, then playing in the last couple of games. This is a really bad look, isn't it, for Luke Shaw?
Yeah, he's testing the patience of a lot of Man United fans. I think Man United fans can see that he's one of the outstanding left back in world football. But when you've got a situation where he gets injured playing for United in February, doesn't play again until the last stages of a major tournament, plays 1.5 games, then comes back to pre-season and is injured again. Lots of United fans, quite rightly in my opinion, are looking at that and going, Luke, come on.
He's had 10 years at United, and in that time he's played, I think, exactly half of the Premier League games available. So he's missed 5 seasons of football. Now, obviously, he had a terrible injury early on, but that was, 2015?
The problem is, and I can understand it from Luke Shaw's point of view, in that if you're given the opportunity to possibly play in a Euros final, that is very, very hard to turn down. I'm sure that he knows that it looks off, that he's not going to play for United now until after the international break. But if you give genuinely a player, the chance to play in a Euros final and win a major tournament, that is a hard thing for a player to go, no, you know what, I'm just going to go away to the Maldives and get ready for my season with my club. And I can understand the scepticism, but it's a really hard thing for a player to turn down.
Do you think he wasn't fully fit then for that final? I mean, I know he wasn't match fit, but in terms of being over his injury.
Well, the United are saying it's a new injury.
Well, is his accumulation of injuries over the years leading to the new injury? Because that's what happens when players get injuries. They get subsequent injuries because the body isn't fully recovered. Now we're only talking 4 or 5 weeks since the Euros final. He's back in training. We might be getting back to the original point that maybe Luke Shaw should have had a longer rest. I know it sounds ridiculous but maybe he should have been away for 6 weeks because he's had injuries in the past.
Yeah.
Why is he back already? That's something that only United can answer. But I do think that I'm surprised he went. I mean, he hadn't played since February. I'm surprised the FA's doctors cleared him because the old days, if you don't play for your club, your last game, you don't play for international.
There's also an issue with United's. You have to look at United's medical department as well. And it's obviously a very touchy subject because you're talking about players' health and things. But you've got situations where Rasmus Højlund in the first game of pre-season is doing a muscle injury.
Absolutely.
Luke Shaw's not played. He's only trained at Carrington, and it's a muscle. It's not. These aren't contact injuries. These aren't someone's gone through the back of you, and it's just one of those things, and you've torn your ankle ligaments. These are muscle injuries. That to me screams that there's something wrong in the way that United players are being trained and prepared.
Well, Rasmus Højlund, in less than a month, has played for Denmark in the Euros, had a short break, got on a plane to the US, to the West Coast, travel, jet lag, straight back into training. It's not ideal, is it, to do that? It really isn't. We don't want to cast aspersions about Man United's medical staff here because they know the player inside out. But still, that gets back to the original point. Rasmus Højlund hasn't had enough of a break this summer. He just hasn't.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the medical staff, but is Erik Ten Hag not got a question to answer
Absolutely.
here in terms of the training programme? Yeah. Because if what we're talking about is load, aren't we? Really, and if they're not judging the loads correctly, they're obviously overloading their players in training. Or it feels as though they're overloading their players in training.
The players that certainly had concerns at the end of last season about the load that they were being asked to take on in comparison to a team like City, where Pep was openly just saying at the end of last season, but they're just not training. They're playing, they're resting. He was saying that they were going to sit in a fridge for 2 days, bring them out, play, back in the fridge. That wasn't happening at United, and some of the players, in particular the more experienced players, had concerns about what they were being asked to do in training.
I mean, I've always wondered whether sometimes you can buy players at a certain level that the Man City players don't have as many injuries as other squads. Maybe certain players are better athletes, just naturally physically fitter, better. Are United signing players that aren't equipped physically to play at that level? They've had a lot of injuries. Are they signing? We talk about Varane, Casemiro. They're all players. Are United signing the wrong player that can't handle the fixture load and the mental strain of playing for a club?
It's interesting on that because Savinho, the lad that City have signed this summer, played for the first time in the Community Shield, and Pep was asked after that game about why did you sign him. The first thing out of his mouth was because he's durable. It wasn't about pace or trickery or he creates this, he creates that. Obviously he can do all that. The first thing out of his mouth was he's durable, and we know that he can play 50, 60 games, and he can play 2 games in 4 days.
I think that's one of the reasons why Arsenal didn't end up pursuing Pedro Neto, actually, because he's had a top player. Chelsea could have stolen another one from under the noses there, but I think he's missed a lot of games through injuries, and Arteta's got this big thing in his head about reliability, and your biggest strength is your availability, I think is how they phrase it internally. So Neto's one of those players who they were looking at for a long time, and then they've obviously decided to go elsewhere this summer, and I think that's durability is now a major factor that all the top clubs look at.
Just on Arsenal, you spent time with Arsenal in the summer. You spoke to Josh Kroenke now. From the outside, I know that Arsenal at times certainly the fans have had a strained relationship with the Kroenkes, but that seems to have been improving over the years. So what did you get from your chat with Josh during the tour?
Yeah, so I felt it was important to redress the balance a little bit, in the sense of that the Kroenkes, I think, rightly took a lot of criticism for their distance and their lack of engagement with the club over many years. I think the way that they communicated was particularly poor. They didn't really relay their level of ambition well enough, and there was certainly a criticism for a number of years that they were kind of just hiding behind Arsene Wenger, hoping that he would, this once great manager would sort of restore them to former glories, and obviously it didn't play out that way, and it got pretty toxic. And then I think that was why when the European Super League collapsed in 2021, probably the biggest protests, or the most vitriolic protests, were at the Emirates, because it wasn't just about the Super League. It really resurfaced all of these issues about, that other clubs were feeling about, oh, you only want us to sign us up for this Super League because of the, you don't understand the game, you don't understand the fans, you don't understand the club. Well, Arsenal fans have felt that about Kroenke for years, and I think, though, the criticism of them during that period was they lack ambition, they're not prepared to invest in the market, and they don't understand football. And I think what they've done in the last 3 years is address each of those by having the bravery to appoint people like Edu, obviously Mikel himself, who was had no managerial experience when he took that role. Sort of senior figures behind the scenes, department heads who've been able to. Richard Garlick is one who very studious, very intelligent guy who's really professionalised the way that they do their business. Tim Lewis is another one who's come on board at board level to really improve that sort of angle of it as well. And they've spent money. They've invested heavily in the market, and they've shown that ambition year on year now to try and go and match City, to try and go and win the Premier League. And I thought the first thing I'd say about Josh is that he's very engaging. A complete contrast to this sort of vacuum that was filled with all this negativity towards the Kroenkes. They can't communicate, they don't like football, they don't understand the game. Very knowledgeable, very personable, very open with his time. It had taken a lot of conversations to get to the point where he was prepared to sit down and do an interview. It was the first kind of time he'd really spoken about Arsenal for about 5 years properly. But was willing to sort of address some of the criticism they faced in the past. What was actually interesting about that interview was we did it in there was a community event in LA, and we were sat together on a sofa, and the press officer was alongside us as well. And I really wanted to get into a lot of the criticism that his father had received, Stan, because he'd gone to those AGMs once a year and been sort of personally heckled, face to face by really angry Arsenal supporters. There'd been effigies of him burnt outside the ground and real personal vitriolic criticism. And I really wanted to get into that with Josh and just kind of humanise it a bit, because they've never talked about it. But opposite us was Stan Kroenke. He was sat opposite us for the entire interview, and it kind of, I'd never quite had this scenario where I was sort of really wanted to get into this detailed, personal, quite
call him over, so come on, Stan.
Well, he did at one point. He did come over, and we did have a brief chat about the Emirates Stadium and possible renovations and work they might look to maybe expand it or improve the stadium, update it, upgrade it, that kind of thing. But Stan came over and we had, as I say, a few minutes chat. He shook my hand. He was again engaging. Everything that people don't think the Cronkies are. I think they feel they've come through a very difficult period. They obviously had a situation with the board level where Alisher Usmanov had about 30% of the club, and they, for years, those two were at loggerheads. Usmanov wanted to kind of pile cash in and become a kind of Abramovich style benefactor, if you like, where we just do this at the behest of one guy. The Cronkies wanted to grow it more organically and do it with, sort of, as it's turned out, more within FFP and PSR rules. And once they bought the Usmanov out of his stake, they had total control, and they were able to kind of navigate then through COVID, then through the Super League, and then get themselves to a position where they're not on the defensive anymore. And I just thought it was, I thought it was a piece that was worth doing. I thought it was a piece that hopefully gave a different side to KSE without being too sort of complimentary, because they have made mistakes like any ownership have, and ultimately they still haven't achieved their grand ambition, which is winning the Premier League.
So in terms of negativity, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Sorry. When did they get Arteta to sign this contract?
Well, the mood around that was, it's quite interesting you bring that up, because we're sat here, 2 days before the start of the season. My understanding was that situation would be resolved before the first game.
Right. So it could still happen.
So it could still happen, but they are running out of time to make that a reality. There's relaxation on all sides about this, in that the board aren't worried. Arteta's seemingly happy where he is. The only thing that nags away at the back of my mind is that if this is Pep Guardiola's last season at Manchester City, and that is a big if they're looking at replacements and they want continuity,
you don't leave Arsenal for Man City. You just don't.
Well, I tell you this: when Jurgen Klopp announced that he was leaving Liverpool, I went to the press conference. I think it was that day or the day after, and Arteta was asked about Klopp and his impact in the Premier League and that kind of thing. And I said to him, well, Klopp has said, I'd never manage another club in England. Arteta had given a load of answers about how much he loved Arsenal and the project and all this sort of thing. And I said to him, so would you ever manage another club in England? And he said, well, who knows what would happen in the future? I'm young, the classic non-answer. And I just thought it just set alarm bells ringing at the back of my mind. I just thought, I do wonder whether one day, as unpalatable as that move would be for Arsenal, whether maybe he could end up managing City one day in the future.
City would fancy their chances. The last time Pep was looking to sign a new deal, we were sat around at dinner before a Champions League game with some of the City chiefs and bosses before this game, and someone said, who would you get if Pep does leave, who's out of work? And one of them turned around and goes, why would it have to be anyone out of work? We're City, we can go and get anyone we wanted. So it wouldn't put them off.
Over the years, though, Man City have had all these. I mean, it's been going back to 2008. It was going to be Jose Mourinho next. It was going to be they like Brendan Rodgers, they like Roberto De Zerbi, they like Mauricio Pochettino. Yeah, they like Mikel Arteta. He knows the club, but I still think that when you're managing a club like Arsenal, you don't leave a club like Arsenal for Man City. It's not like on the Wenger years when people like Adebayor and Nasri left to Man City. It's Arsenal. It's one of the great historic clubs. It's like, I think Liverpool, Man United, Arsenal, when they've got the best players or the top manager, they don't lose people. So
I mean, I have to stress that the expectation on all sides is that he's going to sign a new deal. I'm just saying this has just bubbled along in the background, and if we get to September, and
he needs to sign. He needs to get it done soon, because it would look otherwise that he's stalling or something. And he talks about how he's grown the club and how this team that he's got. He has to kind of throw himself behind that now by saying, look, this is proof I'm now going to stay for 4 or 5 years. Just on clubs that are less stable than Arsenal, Chelsea have had an interesting summer. Players coming, players going. Again, homegrown players moved on, told not to train with the first team. Enzo Maresca basically seeming to parrot whatever the line that the club owners want to give him. How do you rate Chelsea's summer so far?
Well, in a way, it's a summer of change, but it's more of the same. It's a new manager. There's obviously new players coming and going, and yet there's still this through line of I wouldn't quite call it chaos, but certainly instability that really puts Maresca on the back foot, I think, going into the new season, because he's got to get results straight away. The fans aren't overly impressed with pre-season. They lost 4 of their 6 games. They didn't look great in a lot of those. I was at the first one. I spoke to Maresca. We had his sort of first sit-down interview, and during that interview, I was asking him about transfer policy in particular and saying, look, the word was behind the scenes that Pochettino was pretty unhappy with the level of influence that he had in the transfers. Yes, he had a say, but he certainly wasn't the final arbiter on who they signed. Have you been given assurances about signing players and the level of influence you will have? Are you comfortable with it? He's like, yeah, it's fine. Again, like you say, towing the party line. Yeah, it's all fine, it's all good. I think in this context, Dewsbury Hall is a really interesting signing, and there's a lot of pressure on that kid. Because from what I'm told, that was Maresca pushing that one. Makes sense, right? He was at Leicester. Maresca was obviously manager at Leicester. Chelsea, I don't think, had any interest in Dewsbury Hall in particular as a club. I don't think he was someone that they'd scouted or had been advanced by the analytics department. They say they rely heavily on that in terms of identification. So if Dewsbury Hall comes in and he's not good, he has a difficult 6 months. When they get to January and Maresca says, look, I think I want this player, the club are within their rights, and given how they operate, I like to say, well, look, we gave you one, didn't really work, so we're going to continue pursuing our own policy. And my understanding as well is that he wanted to take one of the goalkeepers from Leicester, and they've ended up signing Jorgensen for 25 million, a significant amount of money. So you assume that he's going to be up and running as their number one. So already I was hearing little whispers, even on the tour, even 3 weeks into the job, that there's just a slight differing of opinion about targets, and you think, well, if that's happening now, where are we going to be in January, let alone next summer?
I think the issue at Chelsea is the Chelsea owners don't understand the club. They don't understand the fans. Now, the Chelsea fans, certainly post Abramovich here, or since the start of the Abramovich here, they like a personality. Mourinho, Ancelotti, Tuchel. They want a manager that basically talks like the Chelsea manager. Graham Potter didn't get it, and I don't think Maresca gets it. Maresca seems quite timid to me, and I think that the way they're playing, the way he wants to play, quite a deliberate style of play, he hasn't got the players to do it. I think we saw a couple of clips in the US where the players just didn't know what to do when playing out the ball out from the back, and I get the impression that he's under massive pressure. City at home the first game of the season. The fans have got zero patience with the owners and with Maresca. I can see Chelsea being very, very messy really quickly.
I think if a manager's starting the season on the back foot, history tells you that it's very, very difficult to turn that around. That once it starts feeling too pressurised and there's too many eyes on you, the spotlight's too intense, it's very, very hard to turn that around.
There's one other manager that's we should mention, a new manager, Arne Slot. Now, to me, that seems to be the biggest job in England right now, replacing Jurgen Klopp. I think he's got a really tough challenge. And the way the market's gone this year, they haven't signed a player. They missed out on Zubimendi from Real Sociedad this week, so they might not sign a player. It kind of strikes me a little bit like Man United after Fergie. David Moyes this summer, they tried to bring in players and didn't do. He ended up with Marouane Fellaini. I'm not saying Liverpool will sign Marouane Fellaini, but it just looks a little bit like when Klopp leaves, you've got such a massive personality. You need to replace him quickly with a personality like Slot. Now, Slot seems to have a personality, but a player as well. Now, from what I'm hearing, that they're quite happy with the squad, and I think the issue Liverpool have got, the focus they have, they've got 3 massive players with a year to go on the contract. Trent Alexander-Arnold, Mo Salah and Virgil van Dijk, and they have to find a solution to each of those different problems. And I think they're all very different problems. Alexander-Arnold is totally different to Salah and to Van Dijk because he's mid-20s, homegrown player, attracted interest from Real Madrid. If he decides to run down his contract, I think it would be quite difficult for him. We saw it with Steve McManaman a few years ago. Michael Owen, to a lesser extent, he didn't run his contract down, but he made it clear he wanted to go. If you're a homegrown player at Liverpool and you say you want to leave, that is a bad signal. Van Dijk and Salah, both early 30s now. I'd keep Salah. I'm not sure about Van Dijk, but again, can you lose 2 of these totems of the Jurgen Klopp team? So Arne Slot's walked into a difficult situation then. I think it's going to be tough for him to kind of balance together the expectation with what he's got in front of him. He's got a lot of players that perform so well for the old manager, but how long will they stay, and will the club allow them to stay or take a business decision to move them on? So
it's almost like Klopp knew what he was doing, walking away at the right time. The one thing I would say about Slot is that he'll get far more time at Liverpool than Maresca will at Chelsea by an absolute mile, and that even if Liverpool lose 6 of the first 15 games, the pressure won't be on Slot.
The fans will stand by him.
Yeah,
as well.
they will, in a way that the Chelsea fans won't with Maresca, will they?
What? No. Well, no. And I do think one misstep that Slot may have made in pre-season anyway is that he's not, from what I'm told from the reporters I covered one of their games out there when they played Arsenal in Philadelphia. He's not done a lot of media. He's declined to do anything that isn't contractual, basically, which isn't a lot on those pre-season tours. And I just sort of think, if you're following such a great iconic figure as Klopp, and also a fantastic communicator. You know, I mean, Klopp obviously didn't like elements of media and certainly the volume of it that he had to do, but when he was engaged in it, there's probably nobody you'd rather listen to. You know, sort of fascinating character. I think if you're coming in to replace that figure, you've got to kind of own that space a little bit more. And I don't think he's done much to build up some goodwill, which is easy wins really, which is just come and speak to the reporters on tour, come and get your message across, even if it's off the record, come and have a chat, try and convey some messaging so that if things do go south in the first couple of months of the season, those reporters closest to the club know what you're trying to do.
He did one little huddle with the reporters after their last game against Man United, but you know, for the listeners perhaps who don't know, that traditionally that these managers who go on these US tours, they do this big sort of sit down, don't they, with the reporters, where you maybe have sort of half an hour, 45 minutes. Ten Hag did it with us in LA. Some managers choose to do it, some don't, but it is an easy win, especially when you're first and you're new in the job. It just lays out exactly why you're there and what you're hoping to achieve, and fans can see it. You know, it builds goodwill with the reporters and the press pack who follow the club. It really is an easy win. I thought the same, but it was strange that he decided not to do it.
He needs, you know, the principal concern that Liverpool fans have is, what does the club look like now? Yeah. And that is what they're going to be talking about in the first few weeks of the season. And obviously they're going to judge those results in that kind of relative uncertainty and that turbulence. If there was a framework in place, and by that I mean Slot had really laid that out in a series of media interviews over the summer, then those Liverpool fans could say, okay, we've lost against XYZ, but we can see what he's trying to do because he's working towards this. Then it just creates a bit more of a through line so that they don't react, you know, between we're going to win the league, we're going to get relegated, you know, each week with the results. It's
never a bad thing to communicate, is it?
It's also something that fans might not be aware of. That media management is a big thing. You know, Jurgen Klopp would also do, like the Anfield Wrap, he would speak to the fans, and very few managers, Premier League managers, will speak to fans, you know, channels or programs, whatever. They just won't do it. Klopp did it. And, you know, from our experience, there's been 3 occasions in recent years where Liverpool have carved out time with Klopp. For me, I flew to Bangkok there and back in 4 days once because Jurgen Klopp would speak to us. Now, that, again, is clever on his part, but it's great for us. It means that we've got, you know, time with Liverpool's manager, the great communicators, like you say. And it's also what he gives to the local people as well. And that also, certainly the local reports, it builds up their trust, their favour, I guess, sometimes. And they know that if they've got a guy that is willing to help them out, then, you know, they'll help the manager out. That's simple. It's human nature, isn't it? Now, if Slot isn't doing that, he may do stuff to start the season, I don't know, but if Slot isn't doing that, he's creating a problem for himself which will rear its head down the line. You have to communicate, especially at a club like Liverpool. You know, people mock Liverpool at times for this, you know, this means more, this special relationship, and, you know, I guess that if you're not a Liverpool fan, it would wind you up a little bit, but there is a unique sense to Liverpool and the communication with the fans and the club, so he has to get on board with that, otherwise it's going to be difficult. Just to wrap up on this section, just another manager that's quite a good communicator, Ange Postecoglou. How do you rate Tottenham's summer so far? Yeah,
good. I mean, I think they could go really well this season, Spurs. They've still got a little bit more they need to do in the market, and you are sort of taking a little bit on trust that players like Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall are going to kick on, despite, you know, not having. I mean, they've got great potential, but we don't know what they're going to do in the Premier League. I think Solanke's a really good signing for them. I can just see him fitting straight into the way that Postecoglou wants to play. Gives them obviously more firepower, and they'll have had another pre-season working under Postecoglou and the way that this sort of Ange ball, this kind of extreme way of attacking and trying to win games anywhere on their own terms. So I mean, they're one of the clubs that have not been as affected by PSR as others. They've had, you know, quite a lot of headroom, and Daniel Levy's taken a lot of criticism in the past for not spending. They have spent this summer, and I think they may well look to do at least one more before the window closes. And if they can do that, and they can strengthen again, then, you know, top 4 is very much within their grasp.
Presumably he's sort of waving Conor Gallagher into his car park as he drives aimlessly around the M25 without a club.
Well, this is it. I mean, the Conor Gallagher thing is interesting in that they've been linked with him, and they've certainly been looking at him for a long time. But every time a club's gone in, Aston Villa went in, they've had an offer, Gallagher turned them down. Obviously, Atletico Madrid have gone in now. Tottenham have not tried to rival them seriously. So whether Daniel Levy's playing the ultimate game of brinkmanship here and really going right down to the wire to then get him at the end of the window for a cut price, I mean, it could be a masterstroke. I'd say it's odds against at the moment, but, you know, with Daniel Levy, you can never rule anything out.